Okay. It is a little after 6 p.m., and we do have a quorum tonight. I'm going to go ahead and proceed to call this evening's meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals for the City of Florence to order. First item on the evening's agenda is approval of the minutes from the, what is this, April 25th, 2024 meeting. City staff has sent these minutes to members of the board with ample time to review. Are there any amendments or addendums to the minutes? If there are none, the chair will entertain a motion to either approve or disapprove.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the meeting held on April 25th, 2024.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. The minutes are approved. Second item on this evening's agenda is BZA, appeal number BZA-2024-04. This is a variance request, a request for variance from the size requirements and number permitted along street frontage for freestanding signs. Location is 124 South Cashwood Drive, tax map number 90024-04-012. Owner of record is HBS of Florence, LLC. Applicant is Gary Langston, the owner. Zoning district is commercial general. And the board will now hear from city staff.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, we did hear this case last week, or last month rather, and it was deferred until this month, partially because some new information was brought on the size of the signs, and permitted for each sign is 160 square feet with a maximum sign height of 40 feet. Originally, the requested footage is still in excess of the 160 square feet. The requested total square footage is 360 square feet. So that's a variance of 200 feet or 200 square feet rather, in excess of what is allowed within that district. Here's a picture of the sign that they're proposing. It's the old Swamp Fox Entertainment Complex that was located, and that's where the reduction in height and the reduction in square footage came in their request. When we look at the sign square footage for the measurements, we're looking at the area of essentially we omit the pedestals or the supports in this case, and look at the square footage. So the square footage, this is a sign located at Florence Toyota that we approved, and this one, we omitted the base in this case because it is below the actual signage. It is a support in this case, and the area above that includes the digital display and the area up to the top is the maximum allowed. So that's 160 square feet. So that's just a point of reference. Most of you are probably familiar with that sign. So that one, actually is within the allowable requirements of the zoning ordinance. And that's 160 square feet essentially from the where the display board is up to the top. And it's and this one again is more than double that size. So, and I did want to go over. I included this in your packet just as a reminder. This is an excerpt from the 2018 Comprehensive Planning Guide for Local Governments. This is essentially an interpretation by the Municipal Association of the South Carolina Planning Enabling Act, which is what establishes zoning, and it gives municipalities the right to enact zoning laws. So it's in this particular section is taken out of the chapter on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and I'm just going to quickly go over variances. The board, meaning the Board of Zoning Appeals, has the power to hear and decide appeals for variances when strict application of the zoning ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. And a variance allows the board to modify an otherwise legitimate zoning restriction when, due to unusual circumstances, the restriction may be more burdensome than what was intended. The variance must not impair the public purpose. To obtain a variance on the ground of unnecessary hardship, there must at least be a proof that a particular property suffers a singular disadvantage through the operation of a zoning regulation. An owner is not entitled to relief from a self-created or self-inflicted hardship. A claim of unnecessary hardship cannot be based on conditions created by the owner, nor can one who purchases property after the enactment of a zoning regulation complain that the non-conforming use would work a hardship upon him. And when deciding whether or not to grant or deny variance, the board has some discretion. However, the board is not free to make whatever determination appeals to its sense of justice. The board must apply the standards prescribed by the zoning ordinance and the Comprehensive Planning Act. And the standards for granting a variance, the board may grant a variance in an individual case of unnecessary hardship if the board makes and explains in writing the following findings. There are extraordinary conditions, meaning there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. Extraordinary conditions could exist due to the size, shape, topography, drainage, street widening, beachfront setback lines, which don't apply in this case, but it's in there, or other conditions that make it difficult or impossible to make an economically feasible use of the property. To other property. These conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. And utilization, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And detriment, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. So all of these conditions have to be met. And other factors could be profitability, the fact that the property may be used more profitably if a variance is granted may not be considered as grounds, and conditions. So when the board is granting a variance, the board may attach conditions to it. I think you've done that in the case of with some stormwater concerns over variances where you've required gutters or stormwater conditions to be met. And these conditions may affect the location, character, or other features of the proposed building, structure, or use as the board may consider advisable to protect established property values in the surrounding area or to promote the public health, safety, or general welfare. And, in the applicant's request, they were asked to supply certain information. They have answered where there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. They responded that they have invested a lot of money into the sign without prior knowledge of the sign restrictions. B, that these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity as shown. They filled in not applicable. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property as follows. The sign is, and in this case, they put 535 square feet, but it is less now. It is 360 square feet, and only 160 square feet is permitted, and the height variance is not applicable at this time. And that the authorization of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance for the following reasons. It says, and they replied, we have improved a rundown abandoned building that was an eyesore to the community. It also promoted criminal activity on the premise before we purchased it. And then staff also looked at these similar issues, which is what our variance actions are based upon. One, that a variance, and these are staff's comments, to be considered. One, that a variance from the terms of this ordinance will not be contrary to the public interest where owing to special conditions, a literal enforcement of the provisions will in an individual case result in an unnecessary hardship. The square footage of the sign proposed will far exceed existing adjacent signage and the sign permitted by the Unified Development Ordinance. The property is currently allowed 3 freestanding signs, and direct enforcement of the permitted signage will not limit the property owner's ability to fully utilize the allowable number, size, and location of signage. Number 2, that the spirit of the ordinance will be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Again, the proposed signage is approximately the same square footage of a billboard that would be permitted in the commercial general district. That's up to 378 square feet, so it is a bit smaller, this request. And we only permit those within 600 feet of an interstate and or right-of-way. The ordinance permits a sign of this size directly adjacent to I-20 and I-95 only, and signs of this size are not permitted in the city as commercial identification signs. And there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. This property is a large, single-use parcel with street frontages along the Cashua Drive and West Evans Street and King Avenue. The property is generally flat in its terrain with no known characteristics that limit the applicant's ability to utilize the allowable signage as determined within the Unified Development Ordinance. And it is readily visible due to the size of the lot. That these conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. This parcel is larger than adjacent commercial, other adjacent commercial development, and other adjacent properties have compliant signage. That because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict utilization of the property as follows. Applying the current requirements of the Unified Development Ordinance to the applicant's property would not limit or restrict the applicant's ability to fully utilize the signs allowed by the code. Essentially, they would still have the ability to have 3 signs up to 160 square feet apiece. And that the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. The square footage of the requested sign would be in significant contrast to the existing built environment and would set a precedent for future signs permitted in the city of Florence with questionable hardship factors. Depending on the final location, adjacent residential property to the east and south might be negatively affected by the size and the digital portion that is approximately 224 square feet located on both sides of the proposed signs. So that set of criteria addresses staff's response to the planning or to the variance criteria, and this concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Ms. Dudley. Are there any questions from members of the board for the city staff at this time? Okay. Yes, sir. I do have a question.
Sure thing.
The last one you said on they might be negatively affecting the properties. Let's see. City of Florence. Has there been any calls to the city as far as people saying, local businesses, King Cadillac or anything, making a direct comment or statement?
We have not been contacted by any adjacent businesses or property owners regarding this variance.
Expressing concern whatsoever about it? This has been on the board now for, I'm sure, the signs.
That's right. And we do send letters out to adjacent property owners, yes.
And this is the second meeting we've had with nobody objecting, coming up and making any comments. So as far as the city side, there has been no calls or any statements as far as the business owners making any objections towards this.
Right. We do send out notifications. We don't send them the details of what's going on, but we do send them letters notifying them that indeed there's been a variance request adjacent to their property.
And if they do call in, y'all
Absolutely. We give them we typically supply them with a copy of the staff report and answer any questions they might have.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Is there any other questions? Gary, I do have one other question. When you started, the issues to be considered, when you read that a variance from the terms of the ordinance will not be contrary, in this case, with the staff's comments, it will be contrary, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, you said will not be, no, it's okay. That one word can change the whole.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you, Gary. Is there any other questions for city staff at this time on the board? Okay, thank you so very much. There being no other question, this board will now hear from the applicant. And the applicant on file will be HBS Motorsport, which is represented by, or owned by Gary Langston, and we have a representative for him.
Yes, sir. Good evening. I'm Mike Hope.
Let me swear you in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you're, okay. What is state your name, please? for the
Michael
court?
Hopewell.
Mr. Hopewell, do you promise that the testimony you're about to give us is the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. You may proceed with your testimony to the board.
Thank you. First of all, let me clear one thing up. This is actually the third time this has been before the board. It came before the board in January. I was not present then, but Mr. Gary Langston, Mr. Hampton Langston were, and at that time, I believe the board granted the variance. And the city appealed the granting of the variance, and there was a hearing at the circuit court level, and the circuit court remanded the issue for this board to decide again. In other words, to revisit the issue and issue a new opinion. Last month, we were here, all of y'all were here, I was here. We talked about it, but we had some updated news at that time that the size of the sign was being reduced and the number of variances being sought were reduced from 2 to 1. Originally, the sign was 46 feet, which was 6 feet over the height requirement. And so originally a variance was sought for the height requirement. But before the last meeting, some work was done by the sign designers, and they were able to lop off the top part with the fox on it and reduce the height from 46 feet to 35 feet, which is actually 5 feet below the height requirement. And we're also able to reduce the size from 535 feet to what we now know is 360 square feet. So it's a significant reduction in the variance we're requesting on the overall size of the sign. And the height will not be in variance at all. It'll just be the width of the sign that'll be bigger. So it won't, you won't be able to see it from the freeway. It'll just be wider if it's allowed. And we discussed these issues last month, so I'll be brief, but just to remind you of what they are, and the city informed you also what the code section required. An unnecessary hardship on the owner, and the hardship here would be it's a unique parcel of property. I think everybody knows where it is. It was a Kroger for years, then it was a Winn-Dixie for years, and for about the last 20 years it's been a vacant eyesore, the parking lot and the building itself. But the building is set far back in the parking lot in such a manner that the parking lot is unusually large because the building's not in the middle of it, but it's at the far back corner. And that intersection where Cashua meets Evans has sort of a exit ramp with a yield sign, and there's a median, I guess it would be referred to as a median, right there at the corner of the intersection. And there are trees in the median that inhibit the sight line from Cashua through that intersection to where the building is. So it's a very unique building, a very unique location for several reasons. The location itself, the way the building is placed, and the fact that it's unique in that it's been vacant for 20 years or however long. It may be 15, I don't know. It's been a long time. And then, as mentioned, the statute requires that 4 conditions be discussed. The extraordinary nature of the building we just went over. The second one, conditions do not apply to other buildings in the area. Well, no, they don't. That building and that area, that location is completely unique. I don't know of any location in that area that you would compare it to as being similar. So there we have that. The third, the unreasonable restriction of the use of the property. The part that's really restricted is the size of the parking lot is so large, and if the sign is there, that'll take up some of it and be a use of the parking lot. But otherwise, it's an oversized parking lot, perhaps a poor design to begin with. But that would allow that area of the parking lot to have some usefulness to the property. The last factor to be considered is that would it be a substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good or the character of the district? Well, this business is not going to hurt the character of the district. It's going to improve it dramatically. The closest businesses to HBS Motorsports at the new location will be Advance Auto Parts down Evans Street, and there is a laundromat up Cashua Street. I don't think there's any argument that either of them would be harmed by allowing the variance for this oversized sign there. Rather, it would seem that the business is going to be a boon to the area businesses if it brings traffic through. And as we were told, none of these area businesses have complained about it. And it's the third time it's been before this board over the last 5 months, and the opportunity's been presented to adjacent business owners. And if I understood correctly, no complaints have been issued. So I don't see any victims here if the variance is granted. It started, with a much larger variance request that was actually approved, though remanded, and the request through the source of these meetings and the court's opinion has been reduced to a much more, I think, manageable level. And we appreciate your consideration. Of course, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Is there any questions from members of the board for the applicant? I don't have a question. I do have a, can we put up the sign? You had 2 different signs. One, I know the original one, which is a bad representation, the Swamp Fox. Could you put up the sign to verify which one we're, okay, the one to the right, that's the one.
right,
that
yeah,
I
there's
understand
another
that's what
sign.
we're trying to,
And it should be
do we have one just of this?
yeah, the one in your packet that you're looking at, that's what we are approving.
Okay, do we have a picture of it we can put up on screen? That way we can kind of get a good picture of just the sign.
I don't think we have
Doesn't
that one.
do it too much justice sitting inside that.
Yeah, but it
one
is,
that
it
they're
is the
not doing.
one that is in your packet.
Yeah,
It's on
yes, sir.
page 9.
Yeah, page 9.
Okay, and that is the one,
That
as
is
far as
exactly what,
design.
that is what we are approving today.
because on page 14, there's I know they discussed that tire would not be on top, or, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, there being no other questions for the applicant, we appreciate your time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, sir, can you come back up? We have a question from Ms. Moses. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you made corrections to the height requirements. What about the width? Is there anything you can do about the width?
I don't think so. I think
it is wide, and you want it close to that intersection. You're saying you want it close to that yield sign where it goes around on Evans Street, comes off Cashel and goes on Evans.
that part of that area of the parking lot, I'm not sure exactly, and of course, the city personnel would have some say-so in where exactly it went, but on that part of the parking lot, sort of that large part that goes toward the Cashua-Evans intersection.
I was just wondering if that, because of the width of it, would it do anything sight-wise when you going around that?
It would be placed in such a manner that it wouldn't impact, vision for traffic. And I think that, as was mentioned earlier, the city would have a right to put additional restrictions on it, and approval would be granted for the location of the sign. so that it wouldn't impede, the vision of any traffic coming from any direction.
You can have 3 signs at that, building. So do you plan to put another 2 signs on the other sides on,
There'd be-
Cashua and what's that, King Avenue over there? Do you plan to put signs on there when you have this large sign?
There
Signage in
are
the
2
front.
smaller signs, I think 120 square feet. One would be on King and one would be on Evans, and this one would be on the Cashua. So this would be the 3rd sign. And the number of signs is not a variance. I think 3 are permitted due to the
Permitted, right.
three roadways.
So one sign is going to be removed from there.
It'll be moved to King. The one that's on Cashua now
Got you,
would be
there's
moved
3
to
is
King.
converted on each front, okay, and then the wall sign. And so y'all going to place one on the back street, which is King Street?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that King?
Isn't that right?
Yeah, King Avenue, I'm sorry.
King Avenue.
That's the intention?
Yes, sir.
Is there any other questions for the applicant representative at the time? I do have a question for the applicant. I guess you can answer either way. Now, as far as conditions, bringing up any viewing restrictions or, DOT or special to the city, on a conditional basis, would the applicant be willing to work with the city as far as any restrictions of viewing if this is allowed? Like, so it wouldn't be a hazard on the streets to make, I think last time we talked about no movies play, just,
Yes, sir,
distractions.
absolutely, absolutely. And the city, if the variance is granted, has a right to, spell out those restrictions, but certainly we would not want to create any safety issues.
And the applicant would be willing to work with the city as well as the cities.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions for the applicants?
I'm trying to remember. It might have been stated before, but just for clarification, the placement of the sign. I think you said that you were trying to put some of it so that it would be in the parking lot.
Well, it would take up some room where that sort of empty corner of the parking lot goes out there. The exact location of the sign would be approved,
I got you.
and I'm not exactly sure, but it'd be that part of the parking lot that's just there that has no real utility. It would be in that area.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, you purchased the sign because you wanted the sign to be, you thought that would be a good, sign to put at your new business?
I have one question. Okay, so is the sign, it's not gonna be actually in the curve area coming off of Cashua in the curve, or is it gonna be further towards Cashua? Or is it gonna be right in the curve area?
This will be, we'll put it somewhere out here in this intersection.
Okay, in the
here.
center, okay. Okay.
And it can't be seen from this intersection due to this park that the city has here.
And the sign that will be removed is the one closest to King Cadillac or the other one?
There's one here.
That's correct.
I guess if we had to, we could move it here or so. The other one is up here.
Yeah, so that one's gonna be
This
left.
entrance and this entrance, so we could move this one to here if we had to. But the actual sign that we're, put up would be out in the sun.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
The sign that's there now on Evans, you're going to remove this sign.
No, he
You
said-
have one on Evans Street right by, yes, right in front of that van auto.
It's the one on Cashway, the closest to the washing station, the closed washing
It's right
station.
here.
No, he said that one, he's gonna,
This sign will be removed.
that one right there, the middle one. Yes, ma'am. Or sir, this Moses, the middle one, I believe he is trying to have that one moved to King Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so, but when, and I do want to clarify that when signs are allowed on multiple frontages, they do have to be oriented in such a way that they serve the intended road frontage. So it would have to be oriented such that it did serve Cashua, and then the one that's out on Evans Street would have to serve Evans Street and oriented appropriately. So
So the one he's talking about, he made an indication that in the middle, that would serve both.
it would
that be a
serve
problem
both
for the city?
frontages. Yeah, we've had some gas stations that have done corner signs like that and oriented them in such a way, and we've had to reduce their number of signs allowed, because the one sign, while they were allowed two signs to serve two frontages, they've been reduced to one signage because it serves both frontages. So we've worked with applicants, sometimes they might have an angular sign on the corner or a sign oriented in such a way that it serves two road frontages. But we've historically had them orient them in such a way that they serve the intended road frontage, and they're perpendicular to the road frontage so that you can see the sign from traveling up and down.
And to
both
serve
ways.
the intended purpose, the city would have final say on where the location is, if approved conditionally, correct?
Yes, based on the ordinance.
Is any other questions for the applicant? And then we'll raise from members of the board. All right, there being no other questions, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
issue at hand was not location or having a sign. The issue at hand was variance of the sign.
Okay, all right. There's no other questions for the applicant. Is there anybody else here who wishes to speak either for or against the variance request? Is any other questions for the city or the applicant? Okay, there being none, the chair will now entertain a motion to either approve or deny the variance request. The chair would like to make a motion. I move that we grant the request for a variance based upon the following finding facts: that a variance from the terms of the Unified Development Ordinance will not be contrary to the public interest when, because of special conditions, a literal enforcement of the provisions will, in this individual case, result in an unnecessary hardship, and that this property has been vacant for decades and remains a blight upon the city. Number two, that the spirit of the Unified Development Ordinance will be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done, because the city is committed via this board to allow, on which Mr. Lankson is requesting conditionally, that the location of the sign is approved with the city, as well as the viewing criteria, even if that means changing the regulations within due bounds to allow a vibrant business and foster new growth to our city to amplify our support. That they are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property, namely approximately 7 acres of property in a highly exposed and central location in the city of Florence, which has been vacant and a blight for over a decade, with a structure that may be usable and further enhance the image and revenue of the city with an increase in property. This request speaks very loudly to us, that these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity, and that this particular parcel size, location, is sandwiched between two major streets and heavily traveled areas, backed up to a mature neighborhood, and vacancy duration alone far exceeds any in the general vicinity. Furthermore, the cost of upkeep and renovation wouldn't generally apply to any other property in the vicinity. That because of these conditions, because of these conditions, the application of the Unified Development Ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unnecessarily restrict the utilization of the property by effectively restricting the ability of the local business owner to continue to further enhance this location and allow a greater exposure and wellness awareness that will ultimately fund and employ Florence. It appears our regulations regarding the size of the sign further restricts the property owners of an already daunting task of using the property in a manner to attract customers and present itself to the community as an attractive business profitable to the owners, community, and the city. Additionally, the owner could request a PUD zoning, which allows much flexibility, which we're attempting via these points to consider. We as a board should ask Mr. Langston, how can we help you more? Number 6, that the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance because currently the property is non-functioning, vacant, neglected property, crime, a lot of blight, and that continues to discourage locals with its appearance and vacancy, along with the unavoidable fact that forces greater than time, such as destructive squatters and vandals, have and will continue to further degrade and create even more of a blight to this once prosperous location. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
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 The nays have it. This variance is hereby denied. Thank you for your time, Mr. Langston. Can we take a question now, or do we have to wait to the end?
I mean, you can take the question. It's up to you.
Sure, just swear him in. Okay, sure, come on up. All right, Mr. Langston, please state your name
Gary
for the
Langston.
record. And Mr. Langston, do you promise that the testimony you're about to give us is the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, you may continue.
The previous hearing we had, it was a 5-2 vote in our favor, and we was getting up to walk out happy and glad that everybody voted 5-2 on the last one. It was a done deal. Mr. Charles requested us to provide another rendering of the sign. So it's been approved 2 times, 5-2 and a 6-1 vote. So today, we got 5 people on the board. So where's the other 2? It was 7 on the board last time. So that's my question. Only 5 today. The previous 2 times there were 7 on the board.
We're allowed to begin any proceeding as long as we have a quorum. And as far as the board knows, to our knowledge, that 2 of them have called in and let us know that they're going to be absent.
Yeah, but in the last hearing, it was voted 5-2, and it was pretty much a done deal.
Well, you may appeal this. I'm sure there's an appeal process. I don't think we've crossed that path, but there's a appeal process with the city. I'm sure they'd be more than willing to work with
There is an appeal
y'all.
process for it, and yes, you are correct that we did meet quorum tonight, and it is a 7-member board, and as such, 4 members actually make quorum, but we have 5 tonight, so we had more than quorum.
Is there any other questions? Or appreciate y'all's time. Thank y'all for coming. All right. That being handled, next item on this evening's agenda is our adjournment, Shirley. Is adjournment. The next scheduled meeting is for June the 27th, 2024. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Ms.
Second.
Moses. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Valley, thank you, Mr. Valley. The board is hereby moved to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you for all y'all's attendance.